Andrey Kurkov is a Ukrainian author and public intellectual. He's the author of 20 novels, including the best-selling Death and the Penguin, 9 books for children, and about 20 documentaries and TV movie scripts. His work is currently translated into 37 languages, including English, Spanish, Japanese, French, German, and many, many others. His first novel was published 2 weeks before the fall of the Soviet Union, and in the ensuing social and political turmoil, he made the first steps towards self-publishing and distribution. His works are full of black humor, post-Soviet reality, and elements of surrealism. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Check that you are subscribed to the channel as well so you don't miss out on any content. Please do take a look at the list of Andrey's works in the description of this video. And while you're doing that, check out the validated Ukrainian charities that appear in the description. It's incredibly important that we make sure Ukrainians are resilient and get what they need to fight back against Russian aggression. Andrey, it's an absolute delight to welcome you to the channel. So let's start with the stakes in this war. It seems to me the stakes are nothing less than the statehood, the independence, the identity of Ukraine, its very survival.
Well, from the Ukrainian side, it is a question of survival of the country, survival of the nation, and existence of national identity against which Russia has been fighting for over 300 years. But for me, actually, it's clear that this war is run on 3 levels. This is a level 1 on the bottom for the territory of Ukraine, with or without Ukrainians. Second is the war against Ukrainian identity. And third is actually geopolitical war between authoritarian regimes like Iran, North Korea, Russia, and China hiding behind, and the countries of the democratic world. So, I mean, if Ukraine loses the war, then the power of these authoritarian regimes and the influence will be much greater in the world, and the world order will be completely destroyed. I mean, it is half destroyed now because of Russian aggression, because of the changes to the borders in Europe, but it will be even worse.
I'm also absolutely fascinated in the evolution of your humor and narrative structure from early novels like The Bickford Fuse through to Grey Bees, and of course the unavoidable intrusion of politics into your creativity, the influence of politics on your characters, politics which is obviously thrust upon you and Ukraine. It's unavoidable.
I'm trying to restrict politics, but in fact, actually, even when I try to write novels without politics, politics would just pop in and stay and force me to accept it. I mean, I wrote a novel which is called President's Last Laugh, and I finished it in 2004. And this is a novel written on behalf of a Ukrainian president. In Russia, at the same time, the president is Vladimir Putin, and he, under his own name, promises Ukrainian president to annex Crimea. And in the end of the novel, he's actually sending people to take over Kiev. So I mean, after this novel, I tried to write a novel without politics, which is called The Night Milkman. I failed. It turned out to be a novel about politics, about Ukrainian politics.
Now, in some of the interviews I've seen, you've talked about the luxury of having the wisdom of the distance of time, the difficulty of actually commenting events that have happened recently, even within living memory in the last couple of years. The problem, of course, is that Russian aggression, this war has been going on for 10 plus years. Is it therefore unavoidable that you have to sort of react to things perhaps before the judgment of history has become clear?
No, not at all. Actually, I mean, the Grey Bees were written because of my 3 trips to the war zone in 2015, 2016. And actually, the reason was that in 2016-17, there were about 200 books already published about Donbass, written mostly by volunteers, soldiers, these books were about battles, about enemies and heroes, etc. There was not a single book about life of civilians in the war zone. And I thought it was an injustice. So I decided to give voice to these people of gray zone. And that's how actually the book was written. And in fact, when the book was published in Ukraine, I was accused of writing a book about separatists, because in the view of Ukrainian sort of progressive readers, my characters are negative, not only because they live in Donbass, but because they are from Donbass in their mentality, in their behavior, in their sort of view of life. And after that, I wrote only nonfiction. I have been writing now lately third book about life during the war. The second, Our Daily War, was recently published in London. And I don't think I can write a fiction about what is happening today in Ukraine. In fact, actually, I managed to restart working on fiction, but on the novel about 1919. Before the war, I wrote two novels from this series. It's like a series of historical crime novels, but with real historical and political events on the background. And I wrote two. I published two before 2022, and I was writing the third one. And then I had a break of 2.5 years, and now I'm about to finish the third one, and I want to write the next one about the same period, because I feel that I can hide in the past. And this past, 1919, this is the second occupation of Kiev by Bolsheviks. It's the same story. I mean, the war, 1918, 1921, was against Ukrainian independence. The goal was actually to take over whole of Ukraine and turn it into the Soviet province of Moscow. And Bolsheviks succeeded in 1921. Now it's the same. So I mean, in this sense, it is easier for me to write about the past because I see this past reoccurring with the same level of violence from Bolsheviks.
All your engagement with the videos on this channel is massively appreciated, as well as encouraging comments and the financial support you provide. Some of you will have donated to Ukrainian charities, including the ones listed in the descriptions of these videos. I know many of you ask how you could be doing more to help Ukraine, and that includes me. Well, here is news of a project that I think could make a huge difference. It's been initiated by Silicon Curtain, and I hope will support Ukrainians on the ground and in the diaspora and create real impact to help ensure a Ukrainian victory. It's a documentary film to be made in Ukraine later this year and shown internationally, hopefully at film festivals and on Silicon Curtain as well. We aim in the film to follow the 75th aid convoy to Ukraine by a remarkable team based in Poland, delivering vital medical, humanitarian, and military aid that helps Ukrainians remain resilient. No doubt the efforts of this team has saved innumerable lives of Ukrainian servicemen and women fighting on the front line of freedom. We have a unique opportunity to share authentic stories on the world stage through this film, via film festivals, social media, and streaming to Silicon Curtain. The film will provide a counterweight to Russian propaganda films such as Russians at War. It will show spontaneous stories gathered on the journey as we travel the length of the front line. Filming footage and interviews along the journey, we will have a unique opportunity to convey the shared humanity and common cause of Ukrainians living with war. The film will focus on stories of hope and resilience with the war as a backdrop and aims to create a compelling narrative and tone that is entirely authentic. Well, here's the important bit. We're aiming to raise £12,000 to record the dog sled tournament and create a stunning trailer for the project. Overall, the project will cost up to $100,000 for end-to-end production and distribution. For the price of a DVD rental or a streamed movie, you could help create a film that raises awareness of Ukraine's struggle and generates funds for further aid convoys. Supporters of the film will get early access to see it and free access to the film for all time. This is a bold and ambitious project, but it will be led by an experienced documentary team with a professional cinematographer. It is time, I think, to join together to achieve something powerful and unique for Ukraine. After reviewing many project ideas, we feel that this is the best way that we can have an impact. Tentatively titled To the Edge of Freedom, here is a short description of the film. A world champion dog sled racer navigates dangerous obstacles through the apocalypse-like battle zones of Ukraine's front line, delivering life-saving aid to ordinary heroes engaged in extraordinary acts of valor. Igor Traks, the team leader, is a remarkable personality and relentless supporter of Ukraine throughout the full-scale war. The film starts in Finland at the World Championship Dog Sled Tournament with Igor. Fresh from his 11th World Championship in dog sled racing, Igor Trans leads his foundation's 75th humanitarian mission to the front lines of war-torn Ukraine. For this mission, Igor's team is joined by a few friends from the US and UK who will not only provide hands-on support, but share what they learn on the ground with news sources in the West. Our cameras follow Igor from Finland to Gdansk, to Lviv, to Mykolaiv, Kherson, to Dnipro, Pokrovsk, Kharkiv, and other frontline cities facing the brunt of Russian aggression. Along the way, they will meet colourful and determined individuals fighting for their families' right to survive. Igor and his team navigate life and death situations to bring much-needed supplies, visiting bunkers, hospitals, and units whose success may not merely determine the fate of this ancient culture, but of the West itself. The film will follow Igor's latest aid convoy to the front line and back again. I hope this description will inspire you to become part of the film project and make a difference to the war's outcome, a war that Ukraine must win clearly and decisively. Please do find the donation link in the description of the video and do reach out to me if you have any questions at all about the project and its intended impact. And let's turn to grey bees. I'm really fascinated in this idea of the grey zone that you describe in grey bees. And of course, Russian propaganda seeks to create a grey zone. That's one of the main mechanics of Russian propaganda, that there is no truth, there is, no clear moral stance, that everything is complicated, nothing is clear, you can't have sort of agency or a clear point of view on anything. How far is that concept inherent to propaganda? How far is that concept embedded within your book, Grey Bees?
Oh, actually, I mean, gray zone in the book, it's not only physical gray zone. It's the gray zone in the heads of people who never realized that they are living in a separate state, who were daily watching news about Ukraine on Russian TV. And in their imagination, in their heads, actually, Ukraine was created by Russia. The Ukraine, the kind of Ukraine that they couldn't accept, they wouldn't like it. And this was also, of course, I mean, a fault of Ukrainian politicians who never cared to integrate all the 26 regions in one national space, information space, cultural space. But yes, this book is about really a gray zone in the head of people who are not interested or were not interested in politics, and who were manipulated and who accepted this manipulation, and who paid for this. Actually, not only them, I mean, all of Ukraine is paying for this.
And in Grey Bees, you describe grey people, in some ways hangovers from the Soviet mindset, homus sovieticus. Their region is their religion. It makes it impossible for some people to leave. And of course, if they're old and they have infirm relatives, or they have, if they're farmers, they're the things that are going to tie them to the land. To an extent, it seems that our impression of the East has been shaped by those who remain, not by those who leave. Those who leave are essentially seeking change. They're more dynamic personalities, which prior to the war was a strong characteristic of the East. Now it's perhaps sort of shaped by those who remain, those who resist change.
Well, you know who was supporting October Revolution in Russia in 1917? The poorest people and the criminals. And actually, in Donbass in 2014 and sometimes later, all the elite, local elite, disappeared. Part went to Russia, more went to Ukraine, and some went abroad. So I mean, people, the region was left with no local elite, with no sort of artists, no people of culture, no proper administrators. And so, I mean, like Zakharchenko, who was before the war, he was selling chicken meat on the market. He became the head of DNR, or the Minister of Defense. So, I mean, these people with zero intellect and without any experience, they became elite because there was no other. I mean, there was empty space. And then actually, Russia was trying to use them, and then they realized that they are hopeless. So Russia started sending their civil servants to work in Donbass as local administrators. And until today, it's the same situation. It's mostly Russian administration and those local people who had no perspective, who had no talents, who had no ambitions, who remained there, and who were also influenced by Russian propaganda, because in fact, Russian propaganda for years worked in Donbass in order to create artificial but very powerful Soviet nostalgia, not Russian nostalgia. So for people of Donbass, Putin was somebody who was restoring Soviet Union, not making Russia great again. And of course, I mean, I read many sort of texts written or narrated by people in Donbass that they were disappointed. They expected actually the Soviet Union to come back with some guarantees, things which were never guaranteed. I mean, because I mean, pensions in the Soviet Union were tiny, salaries tiny, the control was total. But anyway, this promise definitely was not fulfilled.
Now, I'd be interested in your view here about what Russia, what Putin in particular, is fighting for, fighting to impose a Russian-centered version of Ukrainian history on Ukrainians, and not just to erase the stories that Ukrainians tell about themselves, but to destroy the very possibility that Ukrainians can tell their own history, evolve their own history, explore those ideas outside of a more mythologized, propagandistic version of history that Russians would seek to impose.
Putin loves to rewrite history, but in fact, actually, I mean, it's very important for Ukrainians to know Ukrainian history, and actually, many will know or they are interested in. The best-selling books are now non-fiction books on Ukrainian history, but we have an internal issue. We have a competition and sometimes a fight between patriotic historians and objective historians. And patriotic historians want also to create some kind of romantic, extremely positive Ukrainian history, ignoring the dark pages of this book and ignoring a lot of things which is important to know also in order to stay sane and moral. I mean, the issue of Volyn massacre, when the Poles were killing Ukrainian peasants and Ukrainians were killing Polish families, etc. I mean, the issue is not solved because the power is in the hands of the patriotic historians, and they are dealing with patriotic Polish historians who also don't want to accept responsibility. So unless we have objective historians on both sides, we will never come to some kind of, I would say, appeasement and agreement with Poland. But one example, or a couple of examples, I mean, like real history and not real history. In the Soviet Union and in Russia, they they called the war 1918-1921 only civil war. They never mentioned that actually there were 2.5 wars at the same time in Ukraine, because it was civil in Russia, where Red Army was fighting against White Army. In Ukraine, which was already independent from 1918, there was Hetman's army, there was Simon Petlura's army fighting against Hetman's army and against Bolsheviks. There was Makhno's army, which was fighting first for the independence of Ukraine and then together with Bolsheviks against Ukraine, and then they were destroyed by Bolsheviks. There was Polish army, which took over Kiev in 1920. And of course, there were Reds and Whites. And I mean, and this is what actually Russia is never talking about. That actually it was also war for Ukrainian independence and against Ukrainian independence.
Well, if we contrast the more organic way in which Ukrainians explore their history, and we look at how Russia has been doing that over the last couple of decades, many documentaries started the process of exploring the past, no matter how painful that was, and episodes, let's say, of the Stalinist era. But what Putin has done is introduced an amnesiac process. He said to people, look, this is painful, this is difficult, well, we'll relieve you of the burden of thinking about all the bad stuff in the past. You're absolved from the guilt of all of those crimes. And actually, none of that stuff happened anyway.
It is, and actually, I should mention that Ukrainians and Russians are mentally different. Russians were always subjects to the monarchy. I mean, they were always politically passive, except for the riots. They always were proud of their country. And when they were upset with the Tsar, they would kill one Tsar and adore the next one. Ukrainians never had royal family. I'm not talking about Galician kingdom, but I'm talking from 15th, 16th century, when the territory was run by Cossacks who were electing hetmans, and then there were intrigues to replace one hetman with another. So, I mean, Ukrainians are individualists. Everyone has an opinion, everyone thinks he can influence the politics in the country. That's why we had Orange Revolution and Euromaidan, and that's why we have 400 political parties registered in the Ministry of Justice. And actually, Ukrainian ideology is to a large extent based on the history of being a victim, history of Ukrainian people being a victim of Tsars, of Stalin, of Polish magnates, of Jewish traders, etc. And actually, the Russian aggression made this feeling real. So, I mean, people were treating it with some kind of humor and skepticism when all the intellectuals were saying that we were always subjugated, we were always repressed, we were killed, we were deported, etc. Now, Russia made it all serious by killing hundreds, probably 200,000 Ukrainians, civilians and military. So now, actually, this pain, historical pain, reached contemporary time and became the foundation of the national identity. So in this sense, yeah, I mean, the fact that Russia says that Gulag was okay, and they have new monuments to Stalin and new monuments to Dzerzhinsky, it just shows that actually they are still in the Soviet Union. They went back. We went forward, they went back, and there is a time difference of 60 years between us. And actually, this is the war between the past and the future.
Well, I'd like to return to these key differences between Russians and Ukrainians, and mindset in particular. And when visiting Ukraine last year in August, I was struck by the countryside, the neatness of people's gardens, the sort of responsibility people take, not just for their own gardens and houses, but the bit of land, outside of that, next to the street. Extraordinary, I would say, neatness and care and sense of responsibility. It contrasts very starkly with my impressions of the Russian countryside. So how important is this connection to the land? How important is the idea of the sanctity of property to Ukrainians? And what kind of contrast is that to Russia? And in particular, these two concepts, kulaki in Ukraine that were suppressed by Stalin, and then this Russian concept of Amelina, which is essentially tenured thievery. It is state-sanctioned theft, for want of a better word.
In my non-fiction, actually, I wrote about it, but I didn't write it about in my fiction. I think I shouldn't be. I cannot be sure because I published 25 novels already, and I might forget something. Yeah, but yeah, Ukrainians are farmers. They are landowners. They are house owners, flat owners, and ownership is very important for Ukrainian families and for Ukrainians. And this is also part of the reason to be individualistic, to be self-standing. I mean, in Ukraine, unlike in Russia, civil society is stronger than political elite and political system. Civil society is pushing politicians to take decisions. In Russia, I mean, people are waiting for the decisions imposed on them from the Kremlin. And then they like them or they don't like them, but they accept it because, I mean, they have no choice. They think they have no choice. Russia has a culture of fatalism. Fatalism is a foreign word and foreign notion for Ukrainians. Ukrainians actually have completely different, much more active attitude. They react. They don't accept quietly whatever comes.
Well, we have two questions left only because time obviously is limited. Well, one of these relates to civic society. Civic society has played a huge role after 2014 of not just the survival of the Ukrainian state, but being able to push back Russian aggression after the full-scale war. It contributes a huge amount monetarily and in terms of effort and expertise into helping Ukraine survive and remain resilient. How important is it that when eventually it comes to a reconstruction phase of Ukraine, that actually the views of veterans are taken into account? They're involved in politics, and actually the money that's put aside for reconstruction is actually channeled through civic society as much as it is through top-down politics.
I don't know yet about veterans because veterans were a very powerful community before 2022. We had more than 400,000 war veterans who went through Donbass and who created some kind of their own society where they were defending each other, they were creating businesses, they were paying taxes and actually fighting on their own against local corruption, etc. Civic society is a bit different. It's very active, but also, I mean, the civic society produced something very unusual, which I don't think exists in other countries. Like people are just purposely making careers inside civic society in order to jump into politics and immediately on higher positions. I mean, we have people from civic societies who were deputy ministers of Minister of Defense or deputy ministers of health, etc. So part of the civic society is too ambitious and maybe not really very honest, but the majority is very honest and very straightforward, and they will not let the government to do something without them. So the government had to create this some kind of what do you call, sort of institutions or boards attached to every minister, consisting of the activists of the civil society who would supervise the zones which are dangerous from the point of view of corruption. And for me, what is maybe even more important after the end of the war, in the beginning of the reconstruction process, is that we have thousands and thousands of volunteers from other countries who would like to come and contribute to the resurrection of Ukraine and give Ukrainians the feeling that actually the world is with them, that actually it's the whole world rebuilding the country destroyed by Russia. That will help probably to create even stronger civil society, but it will make this civil society also much more tolerant and more democratic, because today, because of the war, the society, the intellectuals became very radical. I mean, the council culture is a huge danger, I think, for Ukrainian society, and people actually learned how to hate. It will be difficult to cure them from this, because I mean they cannot, if they don't see the reason for the hate, for some kind of outcry, they will invent this reason.
Well, in these interviews, I always try to end with a question about Ukraine. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out like that in this episode. I am going to ask you another question about Russia propaganda and the Russian mindset. And there's somebody who watches the channel who's been doing some extraordinary experiments by pretending to be a Z patriot, going on to Z patriot channels and writing, taking the extreme ideas, but pushing them to the nth degree, pushing them to an absolute extreme logical conclusion of those genocidal ideas. In the process, he suggests that actually many of the Russians in those forums are playing with these ideas. It's like they're putting on costumes. And when they're shown the real logical conclusion, the absolute moral depravity of those ideas, there's a kind of almost revulsion. They're almost scared by being presented with those. That leads me to the idea that actually Russian propaganda, internal Russian propaganda, isn't about convincing people to believe in something, but actually it's a way of saying, look, this is what powerful people want you to repeat. And if you repeat it, you're showing conformity, subordination. If you don't repeat it, you are an iconoclast. You're somebody who is not supportive of the regime. Belief is not a requirement of the system, but repetition and loyalty is. In some ways, it's reminiscent of the concept of norma in the novel of Vladimir Sorokin. What's your view on this?
For part of population, it is this kind of sad game, but I think actually, yeah, I mean, I'm monitoring some Telegram channels of Russian Z patriots, and I see what they are doing, and actually many of these people are making career. So I mean, they are trying to replace those people who were successful and professional and who left the country because of Putin's ideology. And I mean, like now, the bad poets who became good Z poets, I mean, they are demanding money from the Kremlin. They are demanding money from local authorities to be paid for the reading their poetry in concert halls. And they actually, when somebody says that your poetry is bad, they are saying, no, you are pro-Western. You just don't want us to say and to read what we think and what we feel. So, I mean, it is tragic and comic at the same time. But I think those who are dressing up as Z patriots, who are talking as Z patriots, I mean, they are not conformists. I mean, they are active conformists. I mean, they are making their career. They want to use the moment, because otherwise they would be just keeping low profile and would disappear somewhere, not to be seen, to be heard. Because I mean, fear is much stronger in Russia among the people than in any other country. Maybe only even in China, people are less feared of the authorities, and especially, I mean, since Gulag was again legitimized. So I mean, it means that this fear is well grounded.
Well, Andrey, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you on the channel today. I hope to get the chance to put a lot more questions to you in future. I have a huge script here of unanswered questions, as it were, that we didn't have time to get to. Before we go, again, I want to strongly recommend to the audience they check out your novels, especially maybe starting with Grey Bees as a fantastic place to begin, but also, of course, The Bickford Fuse, Death of the Penguin, and many other incredible works of imagination. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The same.